So I think it is 12:30.
Indeed, it's 12:30, Molly, and I can see that we've got participants starting to join us. So welcome to everybody who's coming to join this Supreme Pet Foods sponsored webinar this afternoon. We're running this in conjunction with this week's Rabbit Awareness Week, which is all focused around room for rabbits. So we thought it would be nice for Molly to put some content together for us to take a look at about enrichment for life and what we can all do to help improve rabbits' environments, which can really make quite a significant improvement to their lives and their welfare. So thanks for you all joining us this afternoon, and I'm pleased to hand over to Molly.
Okay, thank you very much, Claire. And again, I appreciate everybody attending this webinar live, as well as those who will watch it later on. So today I do want to make this very welfare focused, and I want to base this around enriching the environment for our pet rabbits in particular. Although I would hasten to add that this is not limited only to pets. This can extend very much into veterinary clinics and veterinary hospitals. It can certainly extend into things like hobby farms. It can certainly extend into pet shops. And what I want to look at is why is it so important to provide the right environment for these animals. So to start with, I want to just focus on the 5 freedoms. So these are what are generally held to be the basis of providing and elevating animal welfare. And these apply to all species, including man. So the 5 freedoms include a freedom from hunger. And I would say that absolutely, as we often say, that the key to keeping pet rabbits well and healthy is the provision of a suitable diet. So they need food and water. That should go without saying. Fresh, clean water at all times. So it means that you do need to check the water bottles, check the nozzles if you're using bottles, make certain the bowls are not overturned, make certain the water is clean. But we also need to provide food that is the right kind of food for these kinds of pets. And again, we will look at that a little bit later, because we talk about providing the right kind of diet for rabbits very, very commonly. The second freedom is freedom from discomfort. And this is where we start to see the impact of an animal's environment on its welfare. So again, it should go without saying that rabbits need a comfortable environment. They need clean and dry bedding. That means that, you know, dependent on how many individuals you've got, you may well need to do a significant amount of cleaning every day. They also need shelter, and shelter can look like many things. It can look like a small hutch as a hide within a bedroom in a house. It can look like a more extensive setup, such as a garden shed outside. But these guys need to be protected from the heat and the cold. And the heat in particular at this time of year, remember that rabbits get heat stressed anything above 22 degrees. So today, probably not an issue, but in the warmer days, heat stress is a very real threat. Rabbits, in my experience, definitely tend to do better with the cold. They also need to have protection from wind and rain. So they need to be able to utilize their environment to control their exposure or their protection from all of the elements. And notice I say they need to be able to control and to use their environment to allow them freedom from discomfort. We'll look again shortly about what the impact of not being able to do this gives, imparts on a rabbit. The third freedom is freedom from pain, injury, and disease. So no animal deserves to go through life in pain that is not addressed and treated. You know, that is a significant impact on that animal's welfare. Injury can happen at any time for any reason. It can be that an animal is dropped, it can be that it's predated, it can be that there's something in the environment that is inappropriate and the animal falls. However, it happens. And again, injury can cause pain and it deserves to be evaluated and addressed. All of us who work or own rabbits know that from time to time they become ill. And again, the key is that when we're keeping these animals, we have to remember and recognize disease. So dis-ease, an absence of ease in our pet animals. So discomfort, pain, a change in breathing, a change in food intake, all of these things can indicate disease. And again, they require evaluation and treatment. And what this means is that owners of pet rabbits should be willing and also able to access appropriate veterinary care for their pets when they need it. And again, we'll look at what that looks like a little bit later on. Now, getting a little bit further away from the direct environment, but again, very, very important in the grand scheme of things, is that rabbits need to be allowed to be rabbits. They need to be able and allowed to express normal behaviours, so behaviours that you might see in wild rabbits. And it might be that we don't like this behaviour. It might be that actually we'd rather they didn't chew the houseplants, they didn't tear up the garden, they didn't dig. However, we've got rabbits, and these are things that rabbits do. And a restriction from being able to show normal behaviour can lead to stress. Finally, we need our pet rabbits to be fear-free and distress-free. So from that perspective, it is about imparting safety. It's about holding these rabbits somewhere where they feel safe and comfortable. And again, these guys, particularly pet rabbits, need to be able to exert a degree of control within a fearful or a stressful situation. They need to be allowed to move themselves away from it. They need a refuge somewhere to hide from it. And again, those are things that we need to be able to provide for our pets within their environment. So, as always, I want to start with diet because I do think it is the core of keeping rabbits well and providing good welfare. And as we'll see in subsequent slides, it is also a very, very important mechanism for providing environmental enrichment. So what does a good rabbit diet look like? All of you will be familiar with the various infographics that show what rabbits should ideally eat on a daily basis. This particular one is from the Pet Food Manufacturing Organisation, which governs the legislation surrounding the production of pet foods. And we at Supreme always advocate that all rabbits should have access to ad lib fresh, clean hay at all times, and that the bulk of the rabbit's diet should be made up of hay. So clean, long fibre hay, Timothy hay, meadow hay, that kind of thing, provided on an ad lib basis. Broadly, a clump of hay approximately the size of the rabbit's body, but that's a broad church. You know, you can get a very loosely packed clump of hay that will not be enough for some rabbits. You can get very densely packed amount of hay that will be far too much. But again, as a broad measure, that sort of works. All rabbits should have access to a variety of fresh vegetables. And again, if your rabbit is not used to fresh vegetables, introduce them slowly. And what we recommend is introducing rabbits to green, fibrous, leafy vegetables to start with, and increasing the variety and increasing the amount slowly over a period of sort of 10 to 14 days so that they don't get gut upsets. Most pet rabbits have access to fresh greens every day. Most pet owners will give a variety. They'll change things up. They might have carrot tops one day, they may have mint and dill another day. And again, there are very good resources on the website in terms of what things are suitable for rabbits and what things are not suitable for rabbits. The core of the diet is a good quality pellet. And the reason that we say this is that actually the provision of a good quality pellet will mop up any kind of vitamin or mineral deficiency that is presented by the rest of the diet. Now, the vegetables that we buy in the supermarket are not the same as sort of wild type vegetables. It's not the same as getting plantain and dandelion leaves, for example. They're commercial vegetables are much higher in water and they're much higher in sugar. So from that perspective, that kind of edge of the diet has shifted because most owners are reliant on bought vegetables for their pets. So provision of a good quality pellet is very, very useful. They're also very useful if you have rabbits that are growing. So juveniles will need a little bit more support at that kind of a time where they're growing and coming towards becoming an adult rabbit. Rabbits that are elderly, again, benefit from some additional support, perhaps if they're finding eating a lot of hay and a lot of vegetables more challenging because they have respiratory problems, heart problems, or dental problems. So again, it maintains the status quo. Equally, if you have a rabbit that is pregnant, a pregnant or a lactating doe can benefit from a slight increase in the amount of a good quality pellet. We try and steer people away, if we can, from feeding a muesli type diet. Now, the reason for that is that muesli diets are in and of themselves as a whole very nice, very balanced. However, they do predispose rabbits to choosing the bits that they like and leaving the bits that they don't like. So in terms of a muesli diet, if you're going to feed one, then you feed the whole diet and the rabbit does not get any more until they finish everything. However, again, I can recognise that this can be very difficult for some rabbits. Every rabbit and every rabbit owner enjoys a treat, and the owners enjoy bonding with their rabbits using treats. And treats can look like small pieces of apple, they can look like tiny bit of banana, they can look like actually a couple of pellets that are hand fed. Or they can look like commercially produced treats, but again, go with the ones that are fibrous and low sugar that are calculated as part of the diet. They're not an extra. You need to think about them as part of the integral diet. And treats, as well as pellets in particular, can be very useful for environmental enrichment. So we talked a little bit about freedom from discomfort, and the Rabbit Welfare Association and Fund has a very well-known advertising campaign called "A Hutch is Not Enough," and the basis of this is to drive the physical welfare, the environmental welfare of pet rabbits forwards. We have gone past the point at which these guys are left at the bottom of the garden, shut in a hutch from day to day to day. Okay, and in terms of that, room to move is an extension of that. And we need to understand the impact of what the basic environment has on the rabbits. So I mentioned before that rabbits need to have sufficient bedding. So typically rabbits will eat hay and be bedded on straw, although some owners will use shavings, some owners will have vet beds. You know, it is only limited by your rabbit's individual needs, your individual needs in the environment, and actually making certain your animal is comfortable. So bedding can look like a variety of things. The function it needs to provide is padding, essentially, protection from the hard floor, and ideally it needs to wick moisture away. So if the rabbit urinates in an inappropriate place, it is not forced to sit in a wet puddle. The environment also needs to provide cover. Now, this extends into the freedom from distress as well, but it needs to provide cover from the elements. It also needs to provide cover from what a rabbit perceives as a predator. Now, rabbits are essentially not any different from their wild cousins. And at some level, humans are perceived as predators. At some level, other animals, even other rabbits, can be perceived as predators. Certainly other animals in the house, such as birds or cats or dogs, can be perceived as predators. And we need to allow these guys the control within their environment to step away, to hide away from things that they find aversive. Even, if we typically feel actually that shouldn't be a problem, it's not our place to say it is or it isn't. The rabbit should be allowed and able to control that little bit of its environment because it feels protected at that point. Okay, so cover and protection, making that rabbit safe, needs to be a significant function of its environment. Equally, we need to provide space. Now, there was a big study done probably about 10 or 12 years ago now by the University of Bristol Welfare Department, looking into how rabbits utilise their space and how much space is actually required. And for a normal 2 kilo rabbit, the minimum amount of space that is advised is 2 feet by 2 feet by 6 feet. Now, that is actually a reasonably small run. But what it allows that rabbit to do is 3 good fast hops in one direction. It allows it to stretch out on each edge of that enclosure and to stand up with its ears erect on its hind legs. Now, if we look at that as a minimum, that is actually bigger than most enclosures that are sold, and it's certainly bigger than most hutches. However, that is a really minimal amount of space for an animal that might range over the area of several football pitches were it in the wild. So again, we need to absolutely emphasize the need for space for this species. So freedom from pain and disease. So I mentioned that we all recognize that rabbits can have pain. We know that in the longer term, particularly older animals will become unwell. And we do need to be able to access healthcare. And this is really important, particularly in this day and age where we're getting an increasing number of rabbits. We have a reducing number of vets and vet nurses available to look after them. And vet care is actually becoming quite tricky to access. Now, one of the things that you could look for, because I think you need to have good veterinary care, you need to have appropriate veterinary care. So in the UK, the Rabbit Welfare Association and Fund has a rabbit-friendly vet list. And if you look on that list, you will find local veterinary practices that have been audited and are suitable for you to take your rabbit to. And what that means is you will be able to see a vet that is knowledgeable about vaccination, it's knowledgeable about surgical neutering, other preventative medicine parameters that you may need, for example, medication for fly strike. And it will also allow you to have access to suitable dietary advice from somebody qualified that knows your animal, that can taper the advice to any disease conditions that you might be facing, any challenges that you might have. So it is really important to make certain that veterinary care and healthcare is accessible and also is accessed. So what actually is enrichment? We've talked about the environment in broad terms, and I've mentioned the fact that we need to think about it in terms of the animal being able to utilize the environment and also to control certain factors within it. So environmental enrichment is the addition of generally things such as cage furniture or other factors to the environment that will promote welfare. So we'll talk about this in a bit, but it could be as simple as adding a companion and adding a cardboard box as a hide. It does not need to be expensive. It does not need to be high tech. Now, this is primarily related and directed at allowing rabbits to be able to display normal behaviours. And it is also related to altering their time budgets. Now, we talk a lot when we talk about rabbit feeding, about scatter feeding. And if you think about how long it takes your rabbit to eat a bowl of pellets, 25 grams per kilo, it doesn't take very long. It might eat for 5 minutes. In the wild, it would eat for several hours. And what we need to do is to stimulate pet rabbits and allow them to spend more time sort of doing things that are useful rather than sitting in one spot thinking, okay, it's 23 hours till my next feed. So we want to increase the amount of time that an animal that we have in captivity, and obviously pets are captive animals, increase time that these animals spend foraging, they spend exploring their environment and interacting with things that are within the environment. And all of this gives that animal a richer experience every day, a richer lifestyle, if you like. And I think it's important to say that this can manifest in a variety of ways. And what one person with 2 house rabbits might find helpful is very different to what a vet or a vet nurse within a hospital might find useful. However, both of those environments would benefit from some enrichment. And realistically, how you enrich an environment is really, really only limited by your imagination. There is a vast variety of things that you could consider. So I want to talk a little bit about why this is important. And there has been a lot of research done on environmental enrichment on species as diverse as elephants, great apes, children, mice, you name it. There has been some research into environmental enrichment. And enrichment is shown to stimulate the brain, and it reduces boredom and associated abnormal behaviours. So, for example, abnormal behaviours in rabbits might look like things such as barbering. So sort of the abnormal cropping of hair, either by the individual rabbit or by its companion, can be a manifestation of boredom and poor diet. Enrichment allows the animal to interact with its environment in diverse ways. Essentially, it allows it the opportunity to play. And if we think about us as human beings, we would not ideally consider a tiny 2-year-old without the ability to play. So actually, why shouldn't we consider that play is actually really important for our pet animals? It allows development of cognitive ability, it allows exercise, it promotes mobility, all of these things. And actually it brings joy. It allows them to have something that they enjoy doing. In the wild, rabbits are constantly stimulated. Now, this may not always be positive, but, you know, the sights, the smells, you know, other animals in the environment are continually giving them some kind of sensory input, and they are responding to that on a minute by minute basis. If you think of a rabbit in a hutch, it will receive some stimulation, but it has a limited ability to respond to that appropriately. Okay, because it can't run away, it can't hide, it can't dig, it can't alter its environmental temperature. So the ability of an animal to cope with its environment, and ideally to exert some degree of control over its lifestyle, its choices, is actually very crucial to its welfare. So what happens to animals in an unenriched environment? Well, very typically, they're recognised as stressed. And we all know that as soon as the rabbit gets stressed, that gut stasis is certainly a significant potential. However, it may not be as obvious, and owners particularly may not be as aware that other consequences of stress can be effects on both the heart and the kidneys. So chronic stress actually can damage the rabbit's heart muscle, and in very serious and severe cases actually can cause death. So that is a big deal. Acute stress, so stress where the rabbit is suddenly stressed, can affect the kidney function. It can affect the kidney's ability to produce urine. And again, if you think about that, production of urine is how the rabbit gets rid of toxins from the diet. And if it can't do that, then that rabbit will become unwell. So it begins to look like something that actually we really need to have a look at and we really need to deal with. Other consequences of an unenriched environment are things like obesity. So rabbits may well not be fed less in an unenriched environment, but they will be less motivated to move, less motivated to interact with the environment, and perhaps less able to do any kind of realistic exercise. So again, obesity is a very common sort of fallout of having an unenriched environment, and, you know, common fallout of having a hutched rabbit, if you like. Obesity and lack of mobility can then result in other conditions such as urine scalding. So if an animal hasn't got enough room to move away and void in a separate latrine area, then actually if it's sitting in urine or urine soaked bedding, urine scald is a consequence. And urine scalding affects the skin, it causes severe inflammation, can cause infection, similar to nappy rash or diaper rash in children. And from that perspective, that is painful, and it is a reduction in that animal's welfare. Animals that don't have the ability or the motivation to move about are more likely to suffer from hock sores. And hock sores are very similar to things like bed sores or decubitus. They're a serious condition of rabbits who are in an inappropriate environment, perhaps with wet or insufficient bedding, perhaps in an environment where they cannot move around very much. And actually what that means is that the skin over the points of the hock is eroded away, and this can become painful and infected. It can affect the bone of the hock. It can affect the tendons of the Achilles tendon bundle. And all of these combined can result in an animal that becomes permanently disabled. Essentially, what we're looking at, though, is reduced welfare from a number of perspectives and likely reduced longevity. And realistically, to put it bluntly, it is a life that is less good than it could be, and certainly less good than it should be. And we are choosing to have these animals as pets, so we should do the best that we can to give them a good life. That doesn't mean expensive or fancy. It means that we try to improve what we can. So if we compare a hutch rabbit to a wild rabbits always live in groups, typically a male with several females, and they live in small family groups, and a number of family groups generally live in the same geographical location and form a larger colony. Now, this colony likely has a very large warren. There are burrows that are interconnected with tunnels. Now, this provides a lot of access for safety. It allows the animals to control their temperature, so it allows respite from wind and rain and cold and heat. It allows protection from predators. It means that actually every rabbit has to spend a certain amount of time digging, cleaning out the bedding in the warren, those sorts of things. So all of these things provide activities. And, burrow housekeeping is a significant part of their time budget. Rabbits in the wild tend to be most active at sunset through to sunrise, but particularly sunset and sunrise. And this is where they are typically out and about looking for food. And the area that they utilise for food collection is vast. Now, it is the size of several football pitches very typically. This is not 2 feet by 6 feet run. So these animals are made to run and move. And within the group, rabbits will be sitting and eating and producing cecotrophs. Other rabbits slightly further out from the group will typically act as sentinels, so warning those that are eating, at times of threat or predation. So you can see that actually the rabbit life is relatively complicated and it provides a lot of stimulation. This is not a rabbit that is sat in a hutch. And remember that pet rabbits are not materially different from their wild cousins. So if we look at this, the hutch rabbits are very, very much limited. And while they can eat, they can sleep, they can groom, they can certainly digest their food, they are unable to move at will other than within the confines of the hutch. They cannot escape predation. So if your dog is sitting in front of the rabbit hutch, that rabbit has nowhere to go. And that is stressful and distressing. And it's boring. There are many hours of the day where many hutch rabbits actually don't have anything useful or fulfilling to do. So how do we provide environmental enrichment? What physically do we do? And as I said earlier, it's absolutely only limited by your imagination. So what we want to do is to make the environment more interesting, make it as diverse as possible, and allow the rabbit to have a little bit of control. So you can see that these rabbits have a variety of things in their direct environment. These rabbits are lucky enough to have both indoor and outdoor space. The indoor space is a modified garden shed, and the outdoor space is a large run, so significantly bigger than the 6 foot by 2 foot by 2 foot that I mentioned earlier. You can see that one of the things that we're using here are cardboard boxes. Now, you can buy cardboard rabbit castles, you can use a packing box. You can use a cardboard box in your outside garden, you can use it indoors, you can use it actually in a veterinary setting very, very easily. And the advantage to this is actually they can climb on it, they can chew it, they can throw it around if they so choose, they can hide in it. And so it allows them a little bit of refuge and respite, for example, should there be the perception of predation. It gives them something to do that is reasonably normal behaviour. And again, all of these things are positive. I mean, if you think about what a rabbit needs to do to jump up on a shelf or on a box, think about what it needs to do in order to be able to trash that box completely, throw it around. All of these things are promoting mobility and promoting the rabbit interacting with the environment. So the options are absolutely endless. Now, these are a different set of rabbits that are owned again by another one of my clients. And these rabbits have a very, very extensive environment that extends from the inside to the outside. So you'll see that there is an outdoor caged area. And within this caged area, there are tunnels, because rabbits love a burrow. There are live growing plants, there's access to water, there's access to food, and there are a variety of toys and things like that. You can also see in the right-hand picture that there is access to an outdoor digging box. And this allows the rabbits to burrow and dig. And all of these things are a different way of providing, enrichment and allowing the rabbit to live a more diverse and complex life and allow it to have a little bit of stimulation from its environment. Now, you'll notice that most of the pictures I've shared already are rabbits in pairs. And I do want to discuss companionship as a form of environmental enrichment. Now, ideally, we would have all rabbits kept in at least pairs, if not slightly larger groups. And I have a lot of clients these days who have very successful groups of 3, 4, and even 5 rabbits. So from that perspective, that is absolutely possible and is only limited, again, by your experience, by the space that you have, and by sometimes the individual rabbits and their temperaments. But because rabbits are an intensely social species and they spend much of their time in direct contact with their little groups, to have a rabbit on its own can cause a degree of distress. So compatible pairs are definitely something to consider. Historically, many rabbits have been kept with things like guinea pigs. Now, this can work very nicely. However, it can prove quite stressful for the guinea pig in some circumstances. Because of the size disparity, the guinea pig can be bullied. There can be issues with food resources because guinea pigs require vitamin C in the diet, whereas rabbits actually can make their own. So their dietary requirements are not identical. And also rabbits can carry a disease called bordetella, and guinea pigs tend to get quite significant pneumonia from that. So from that perspective, guinea pigs and rabbits together may not be ideal. If you have a stable guinea pig rabbit pair and everybody's happy, then I wouldn't put that apart. However, I wouldn't advocate it sort of going forward. In some cases, it is certainly possible for a human to fulfill the role of a companion, and particularly for owners that are perhaps within the environment for most of the time, perhaps you're working from home, that kind of thing. And again, as long as you're able to be there and fulfill some of the grooming requirements and the company requirements, then that can work very well. Now, I'm more equivocal about having other species as companions. From the picture, you can see that it can potentially work. However, cats are always going to be predators and rabbits are always going to be prey. And I think that in a situation where I had the choice, I would not choose to constrain a rabbit to be in the same environment as a cat. And I would not constrain a cat to be in the same environment as a rabbit. So I would be a little bit more questioning about that. So what about other things we can do in the environment? Well, I think one of the things that I mentioned right at the beginning is increasing the amount of time that the rabbit spends foraging. So it shifts the time budget. It allows that animal to spend more time collecting food, similar to what it would in the wild. It can provide mental stimulation. It is likely to encourage them to move around more, because the basic way of increasing the time foraging is to scatter feed. And what that means is utilising your pellets and spreading them around the environment. So they are a high value item of food that the rabbit will interact with other items of food, such as hay, in order to collect. This means that they're stimulated to move. It means that they're stimulated to eat hay. It means that it takes them longer to eat their allotted amount of pellets every day. It is, again, limited by your imagination only. And this is where things like puzzle feeders and certain other types of toys can be very, very useful. So here are a variety of different options. On the far left-hand side, we have greens that are pegged out on a line, if you like, so the rabbits have to stretch up and get them to manipulate them and eat them. We have sort of hay feeders with different size holes. You can certainly hide pellets within this type of apparatus. And then we have sort of a rolling hay feeder on the right hand side. And again, you can use pellets, etc., within this to encourage the interaction. But all of these mean that feeding becomes more fun, it becomes more interesting, and it takes longer. What about toys? And again, you're only limited by your imagination here. Toys will give pets something to do. And it might be they're using wicker balls, it might be they're throwing them around the lounge, it might be that they're using them to chew, it might be that actually you have a combination of a toy that has food within it to increase interaction with that piece of equipment. And again, it is to encourage playing. It's encouraging our pets to do something that they enjoy. Now, we could think about other activities, and environmental enrichment ideally would be to promote normal behaviours. But in other species, such as great apes, if you look at this chimpanzee, this apparatus is in requiring it to use a tool to get a food reward out of a plastic box. So it's sort of a wild behaviour, but it sort of isn't. So in terms of other activities, many owners have things like ball pits for their rabbits. Again, it encourages mobility. It's not very natural behaviour. However, it might well be perceived as positive and fun by these guys. And again, it improves the time budget. Other activities such as rabbit show jumping are becoming more popular. And again, I think that there are varying views on whether this is a positive or a negative. I think it's out with the remit today to discuss that. But to just, to just think you're really only limited by your imagination and what your rabbit enjoys. So freedom from fear and distress. I want to labour this as a final point because, again, rabbits are still a prey animal, and whatever we think, we can't control what they perceive as a predator. So we need, in our captive environments, to allow them to have some kind of a refuge. And this is where hide boxes come into their home. And what I always say to owners is that if you have 2 rabbits, you need 3 hide boxes as a minimum within the environment. And for me, a hide box is the size of a single rabbit and it has 1 opening. So a hide box, for example, is not a tunnel. And you know what, it could be as simple as a cardboard box. And what these hide boxes give us is it allows each rabbit to move from one box to another and to not be pestered by its companion if it wants to not be. So what that then needs to look like is you also need to have space for the rabbits to be together, which means that you need a hide box that is big enough for 2 rabbits if they want to shelter together. And you can see that this is starting to look like a much more complicated environment and ideally a bigger environment. But again, it might be that what that means is 4 cardboard boxes that they can then throw around and trash and do all of the other things with. But these little points are really important in order to make certain that we can allow rabbits to exert some control and we can reduce fear and distress within the environment. So I would like to say, everybody, thank you very much for listening. The images, as I said, are used with permission from several of my wonderful rabbit clients who keep their rabbits in very different but very, very good environments. The runaround products are the property of these owners, and the images are used with permission of the company. So I'm going to set some homework. We've got some good resources. The Practical Veterinary Welfare has a chapter on environmental enrichment and covers a variety of other welfare issues, and it's aimed at everybody from vets to owners. So it's a very, very inclusive book. So shall we open it up to questions, Claire?
Yes, thanks ever so much for that, Molly. Really enjoyed seeing some of those pictures of those environments. They were super, and particularly like the scatter feeding advice and the advice on you know, using different ways of feeding pellets using hay. And we've certainly got quite a few blogs and things on our website that can help people with those kind of things if they want to have a look at those. So yeah, I don't know if anyone has got any questions following that. Please fire them in on the Q&A. Certainly one that we've had in, Molly, you talked a lot about cardboard boxes, and one of our attendees has asked if you ever worry about rabbits eating the cardboard.
I would certainly worry if the rabbit was eating a lot of cardboard. Absolutely, I would, because what we do not want is a gut blockage at all. However, most rabbits that are fed a suitable diet and have access to suitable diet items in the environment will eat the dietary items rather than the cardboard. And the destruction of the cardboard is really what they enjoy typically. And I tend to find actually that almost every rabbit that I have in hospital, and I do sit there and watch them, all of them will tear newspaper. And again, we watch them quite carefully to make sure they're not eating it, but they all tear the newspaper. They might not eat anything else, but they'll definitely do that. So we need to recognise that, yes, it can be an issue if they eat it. However, to be aware that it's also a positive.
Yeah, no, that's great. We've also had another question come in from Stella Hitchens asking us about how many pellets should we be feeding rabbits per day. And I don't know whether you want me to perhaps cover some of this, Molly, and happy for you to shoot me down or not as you see fit. But
go ahead.
From a nutrition point of view, from Pet Food Company, we always say that it's quite important to actually know the weight of your rabbit, because I think there's various advice out there. Some people say feed an egg cupful, some people say feed a teaspoonful, but a lot of it will depend on the weight of a rabbit and the body condition score of that rabbit. And certainly I think it's important to understand the body condition score of a rabbit, And again, the Pet Food Manufacturers Association has got some good resources that you can download from their website on that. And then we would usually recommend to feed 35 grams per kilo of body weight per day. So if you've got a rabbit that's sort of around about 2.5 kilos would probably be an average size, we would recommend about 70 grams of pellets per day for that rabbit. But again, I think it's really important to keep monitoring body condition to make sure that the rabbit is the ideal kind of weight and size. I don't know whether there's anything that you would add to that, Molly.
No, I would absolutely agree. I think the weight plus the body condition is the key thing to sort of get your head around, definitely, because also rabbits' weight can shift significantly with things like gut stasis, and their body condition might not change, but equally the body condition can change and the weight may not, for example, if we have a rabbit that has a tumour. So looking at both of those things and reassessing it fairly regularly as well, so that, you know, if your rabbit is on 35 grams a day and you think actually this is getting a little bit chunky, then maybe taper back. And you know, I think a small amount each day, so 35 grams, and actually weighing it so you know what it looks like, because I think it's probably different than what most people will feed.
Yeah, and I think another point that I would probably add to that is that every single rabbit food diet that's out there has a very different bulk density. And when I say bulk density, I guess I'm kind of talking about the difference if you were to have the same amount of calories in a portion of peanuts compared to a portion of popcorn. Your popcorn portion would be much, much bigger. So I think it's important to, as you say, check the weight of the food, because some like cold pressed pellets are very dense and the portion size will be much smaller, whereas products like our fibre first food, for example, which is predominantly a hay-based food, would probably have a volume that was twice or even 3 times as big for the same calorific content. So yeah, I think that's important to consider too. Okay, so I don't think we've got any more questions coming in at the moment. We've had some thanks from Aileen Irvin, who's said thank you, Molly, for the presentation, and Diane Westwood has also said excellent presentation, really informative, thank you. So yeah, great big thanks to everybody who's joined us for this webinar. There will be a recording, so if anybody wants to have another look or pass this on to friends or colleagues, then keep an eye out. We'll be sending an email with a link to a recording of the presentation. So thank you very much, Molly. Thanks for a fabulous presentation. It's gone down really well, and hopefully I think it will have given a lot of people many tips on how we can all work together to improve the welfare and lives of these lovely little animals.
Yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity again to speak, Claire. And again, I'm glad everybody's enjoyed it, and let's all go forward and enrich these environments. Yeah,
absolutely. Great. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you, Molly. We hope to see you again soon.